As for Florida, now this is going to be confusing, but don't try to learn it. I'm not going to ask on a test. But Florida started off being owned by the Spanish. The Spanish gave it to Great Britain. Then Great Britain wound up giving it back to Spain. Then Spain finally sold it to the United States. So Florida wound up going back and forth between Spain, Great Britain, and Spain again, and before the United States got it. All right. This takes us up to the French Revolution. Now, when I first studied the French Revolution, I was a student in high school, and I must say, my alma mater, Madison High School, only had Americans going to the school there. Everybody there was an American. But our teacher gave us a paper in which he said the French Revolution is still an issue. And then he said, you ask any American about the American Revolution. The American Revolution had occurred just about 15 years before. Any American will tell you the American Revolution was justified. Oh yes, they'll say that's obvious. The American Revolution is not an issue. Every American, practically all Americans agreed it was necessary, it was justified. The results were worth the bloodshed, the results were worth the pain. The French Revolution, to this day, you get 5 Frenchmen together, they can give you 5 different opinions. In France today, there is still a royalist party, a party who believes that a divine right monarch should govern the country. In France, there are still people who will side with one group, and there's other people who will side with another group. Basically, they're still fighting the revolution. Unlike the American Revolution, the French Revolution took extreme forms. I mean, at one point, they kicked out the church and they kicked out all religion and said, we're going to set up a new religion, and began worshiping a goddess they called Reason, and they converted the Cathedral of Notre Dame to a cathedral of this goddess of Reason. Then they had a reign of terror where they chopped off 5,000 heads with a newly invented device called the guillotine. They decided the axe, all right, this might sound gross, but an axe man would sometimes halfway miss and have to do chop twice to get the head completely off. With a guillotine, it guaranteed a clean, neat cut. The man who invented the guillotine wound up going there himself as a victim. The king and queen lost their heads to the guillotine. The king, Louis XVI, and his wife Marie Antoinette. Both of them executed by means of being guillotined. And it's strange because the Enlightenment had outlawed the death penalty, or they advocated outlawing the death penalty. And yet, and what's also strange, the French Revolution outlawed the practice of flogging, which is still a law that's still on the books today. Generally, countries we call civilized do not flog people. But then they replaced it with a guillotine. I mean, which would you rather be? Beaten pretty badly or have your head chopped all the way off? But at least they believed that death was instantaneous and painless. All right. I don't know how appropriate it is to say this to the state school, but the American Revolution, if you compare them, the American Revolution was instituted by preachers in the 13 colonies, and it invoked divine blessing before it started. The French Revolution said we're going to kick out all God, all human government, we're going to start mankind all over from scratch, with no religion, no God, and no government. Anyway, we're about to see the results. What caused it? All right, you have what's called the old regime. The old regime had 3 estates. The highest estate being the clergy, estate number 1, estate number 2 being the nobility, and estate number 3 being everyone else. Now, obviously, the commoners were divided into ranks. Well, the nobility were divided into ranks, with the king being the highest. Below him were the dukes, and below him were the various ranks of nobles. Even the clergy were divided into ranks. But these were the three estates. These two estates had privilege. They didn't pay taxes. When they went to court against one of these, you could guarantee these two estates would win a case against one of these, because the courts were slanted and told, slant your judgment in favor of the privilege and not in favor of the ordinary person. Now, after the reign of Louis XIV left his people in poverty. But the next king, late in his reign, experienced some prosperity, and France went through 50 years of relative prosperous times, which has led to the saying, things were never better, things were never worse. Things were never better than things were prospering, but underneath that prosperity was a lot of unease and tension, especially when everybody in France seemed to know that the prosperity was really, really delicate, and all it would take would be a little bit to undermine it. Well, the undermining came when France went through a couple of bad years, lack of rain, I believe, or maybe cold weather, or whatever. So anyway, bad crop years brought on by bad climate. And things began to get bad for France. The king and queen knew nothing about government, hardly anything. Louis XVI had been raised up in isolation, which is the worst thing you can do when you're rearing up a future king. But he'd been raised in isolation. He was weak and sickly. Some doctors who have studied his physical ailments say they believe they could cure his, what they called it, in my day they called it a glandular disorder. But again, I don't know what kind of disorder he might actually have had. But he's looked on as being lazy, but actually it might have been that he was simply weak and sickly, and not necessarily lazy. But anyway, he was looked on as being weak. As for Marie Antoinette, she was a spoiled little princess, one of the Austrian queen. She was the daughter of Maria Theresa, the Queen of Austria, and one of the Austrian queen's something like 17 children. She was supposed to produce an heir to the French throne, but when she got to France and married the Dauphin, or the king's son, the next in line for the throne, your book says that the marriage was not consummated for 7 years. That's putting it mildly. The fact of the matter is, for 7 years, the first 7 years of marriage, Louis XVI was unable to have sex. And again, this is something that's been whispered, but finally I got to see a documentary about it. But he simply was unable to perform sexually for the first 7 years of marriage, until one day Marie Antoinette's brother, the Crown Prince Joseph, who became Joseph II later, came over, and he had a talk with his brother-in-law Louis. I mean, it would take someone of that high rank to reach him, and after he had a talk with Louis XVI, the King of France, I mean, after all, he was the brother of Marie Antoinette, Louis, either he decided to perform or started performing. Marie Antoinette had her first child. She was to wind up having a few more children. I don't know how many, but it was like 5 or 6 children she had. And therefore, after that, she withdrew from French life a lot and devoted herself to being a mother. But by that time it was too late. She had completely ruined her reputation. Well, she had all kinds of problems. You look in detail, there was an affair called the Diamond Necklace Affair, where some lady disguised herself as Marie Antoinette and bought a diamond necklace and said, send the bill to the palace, and Marie Antoinette would pay for it. Marie Antoinette said, I never ordered the necklace, and she refused to pay, and this made her really unpopular because everybody thought that she had ordered a necklace. Today we know some impostor had imposted for her, but she was also called the Austrian. She had all kinds of issues, and yes, she was accused of marital infidelity against her husband. Stories that might not be true, but nevertheless she conducted herself in such ways to lend credence to those stories. All this made the royal couple extremely unpopular, And especially when they were completely out of touch as far as understanding politics. Hey, how do you run a government? They seemed to know nothing about it. Well, to his credit, now again, he's being an American, I have to say thank you, Your Majesty. Louis XVI was a king who decided to help the American colonies in their fight against France, in their fight against Great Britain. And with Louis XVI's help, the 13 colonies won the Revolutionary War. All right, that sounds great for me being an American. It was terrible for the French because the French could not afford the war. I mean, they had to transport their troops 4,000 miles across the Atlantic to fight on foreign soil. And about that time, hard times began to beset France. And to make a long story short, the king could not pay the bill. Well, now, the United States has a Congress. Britain has Parliament. The equivalent in France was an institution called the Estates General. It